And welcome everyone. As you said, I'm Jamie Viebach. I'm a horticulture educator here in suburban Chicagoland. I cover Kane, Kendall, and DuPage counties. And I love butterflies. Never thought I would be quoting George Carlin in one of my presentations, but here we go. The caterpillar does all the work, but the butterfly gets all the publicity. And boy, isn't that true. Many people don't really think about caterpillars, or if they do, it's because they're eating our plants and you want to find a way to get rid of them. But caterpillars can become valuable pollinators, and it's important to understand them if we want to make sure we have these beautiful additions to our gardens. So we're going to start today by learning a little bit more about the life cycle of butterflies and caterpillars so that as we understand them better, we know what we need to do to encourage them to visit our yards. And of course, this was from a few years ago at the Morton Arboretum when they had this fabulous Lego display all over the Arboretum. And that was a really cool one I liked, of a monarch butterfly on some milkweed. And now it's time to play everyone's third favorite game show, Butterfly, Moth, or Skipper. Just kidding. Really, this comes down to some taxonomic issues. Taxonomy is how scientists group living things into different families. So these groups are generally related by similarities in appearance, behavior, and sometimes geography. So here we're going to take a look at some of the differences between them. So first off, what is a moth? So the top right photo there is called a modest sphinx moth. I took that photo in Wisconsin, I think last summer, a couple summers ago. But there's a wide variety of species under the umbrella of what we call a moth. Taxonomy is it's surprisingly difficult when you start getting down to it, how you define something as this instead of that. One of the ways that we determine something as a moth is by the antenna. So that photo down at the bottom, that's a close-up of a Luna moth's antenna. You can see how they almost look like feathers. And that's one of the things that we use to determine if something is a moth. Moths tend to have those really feathery type antennas. The wings are held far apart at rest. So rather than being folded up over the back, they have a very stout body with shorter wings comparatively. And mostly they tend to be nocturnal. Now, that doesn't mean you won't see them flying around during the day sometimes, but for the most part, they tend to be nocturnal species. Skipper, they fall under the superfamily Hesperioidea. They have hooked antenna tips. So remember, the moths tended to be kind of feathery. These have like little hooks on the end of them. The antennas are also spaced far apart on the head. I know in this image it's a little blurry and hard to tell, but if you look at the head of this skipper, the center thing is the proboscis that's out there drinking nectar from this clover flower. But on either side of the proboscis, you can see the antenna. So they're kind of spread apart on there. We'll see on the butterflies in a minute that it's a little bit different there. These hold their wings together over their back when they're resting. So we saw the moth holds them out horizontally. They tend to fold theirs up over their backs. They also have a stout body similar to a moth with shorter wings, but they're diurnal. That means they fly mostly during the day. So again, some similarities to moths, some similarities to butterflies, kind of puts them into their own little group here. Butterflies also have just one superfamily, Papilionioidea, easy for me to say. They tend to have clubbed antenna tips. So again, not feathery like a moth's or hooked like the skippers, but you can see in this image here, I believe this is a comma. I always struggle to tell commas and question marks apart, but I think this one's a comma. But if you look at these antennae, you can see how they have sort of that swelling at the end of them, that sort of clubbed look. Their antenna attachment is also close together. So their antenna makes sort of a V shape. Unlike on the skipper where we saw them spaced apart on the head, the antennas are attached pretty close together. They also tend to hold their wings together over their backs while they're at rest. Sometimes if they're basking, trying to warm up in the sun, they may open them up, increase that surface area so they can take in more heat. But if they're just at rest, or like this one here is snacking on an orange I had put out for the orioles, they'll keep them together, which is why a lot of times the inside of their wings looks a lot different from the outside. So if they're at rest with their wings folded up here, they really resemble a dead leaf. So predators might just not even notice them, whereas if they had the wings wide open, the insides are going to be brightly colored. They're going to be a little more visible to predators. Unlike moths and skippers, they tend to have a much more slender body with larger wings. And they tend to be either diurnal, again, flying during the day, or crepuscular. This is one of my favorite words. It's a great trivia word. It means dawn and dusk. So if you think of white-tailed deer, they're a good mammal example of a crepuscular animal. They come out right around dawn and dusk during the heat of the day. They're probably off sleeping somewhere. But butterflies tend to be either diurnal or crepuscular. Now, the life cycle is really important to understand. This is going to help us later on in this talk when we discuss how to bring them to your yard. But butterflies tend to have a complete metamorphosis. That means they go through the stage of egg, larva, pupa, and adult. So you can see here, this is the monarch's life cycle. They start off as an egg. It's a little tiny thing on the underside of a leaf, about the size of a head of a pin. And a couple days after hatching, out comes this little tiny caterpillar. He's got a black head and an almost white, off-white kind of body. And he's about a third the size of a grain of rice. So they're teeny when they come out of that egg. And then they go through what they call instars. And an instar is essentially the period between when they molt. Every time they molt, they're going to look a little bit different when they come out of that molt. So monarch caterpillars go through 5 instars. So you can see, after a couple of days, he's going to molt and he's going to start to get his stripes already. And then they have those little nubby things on the top of their heads those are going to be their antenna later on. And then, by the time they get to that 5th instar, they are now about the size and diameter of my index finger. So they go from a third the size of a grain of rice, and within 2 weeks of doing nothing but eating and pooping, they grow to be about the size of my index finger. So they get really big. So after about that 2 weeks of eating, they're going to go find a quiet place somewhere. They find the oddest places to make these chrysalis, but they're going to make a little silk pad. They're going to hang upside down, kind of by their back toe. And they're going to hang upside down for anywhere from about 24 to 48 hours. After that time, a crack is going to appear in the top of the head. Remember, the head's pointing towards the ground. So a little crack is going to appear there. And just like a snake shedding its skin, it's going to do this almost like a slow motion, invisible hula hoop motion, like just gyrating around. And the skin is going to work its way up the body, again, similar to a snake shedding its skin, and until it makes its way all the way up to the top to that silk pad there, and then it's going to pop off. Underneath that skin is where this chrysalis is. The monarchs don't spin their chrysalis. They don't make it in any way. It's actually just underneath their skin. It's really bizarre to see. And they're going to stay inside this chrysalis where the majority of their body is just going to turn into a goo. So there's a couple of organs that will stay intact. You can see those little gold dots on there. Those are analogous to the spiracles on the caterpillar. Spiracle is just the way an insect breathes or does gas exchange. And that's what those little gold dots on there are, is that's how it's essentially breathing. But everything inside just turns to this goo. And over the course of about 2 weeks, that goo is going to just coalesce into a butterfly. And after about 2 weeks, that green, bright lime green chrysalis is going to turn dark, almost black. And you'll start to see the pattern of the wings in it. And then that chrysalis is going to split open, and the monarch is going to force his way out. He's going to hold on to the shell of that chrysalis while his wings dry. And he's going to hang upside down, let gravity do some of the work for him as these wings fill with their blood. It's called hemolymph, but they're going to fill, and he's going to dry them out, and he's going to stretch them. And, you know, after being cramped up in there, I imagine it's sort of like being in an airplane seat for a while. You know, you're all kind of crammed in there, and then you got to get up and stretch. And so he's going to stretch out, let those wings dry, and then be able to take off. And I say he because the image of the adult that we have here is a male. And we can tell that because there's a couple of things, but the most obvious is those two dots on the hind wing. You see those two kind of swollen black areas in the middle of those vein-looking things. Those are, it's like a pheromone scent gland. So that's what he's going to use to attract the females. Females don't have those dots there, and those black veins in the orange part of their wing are going to be a little bit thicker. So again, that's just how we can tell that this is a male. Note again, too, here you can see on his antenna how they're attached real close together, like the letter V at the top of his head. So again, classification of a butterfly. But yeah, so that's the life cycle. So as an adult, they're going to be eating completely different things than the babies are. So you wouldn't feed a 9-month-old a T-bone steak. At least I hope you wouldn't. And similarly, caterpillars don't eat the same thing as their adult counterparts. This is really important to know because it can affect where you're going to find the different species. And if you're trying to attract them to your yard, having that T-bone steak is good, but having a source of baby food is even more critical. Knowing what the caterpillars eat and then planting that will help to attract females to your garden that are looking for a place to lay their eggs. Adult butterflies are going to eat more than nectar too. Some adults eat tree sap, omnivore scat, and other sources of liquid and nutrients are also attractive to some species of butterflies. So here we can see the adult monarch is on a common milkweed flower. The adults do nectar on milkweed, but the caterpillars eat their leaves. Even though the adults can eat a variety of different things, when it comes to the monarchs, they're only going to be able to eat the milkweed leaves. And so that's, again, really important to know, and we will get into a lot more detail on that in just a minute. So for this presentation, I'll be focusing on butterflies found mostly in and around my region of northeastern Illinois. Many of these butterflies are going to be found across the state and some even across the country. There's many more really cool species that are found outside of our area, but because this is where I'm at and I only have an hour, the focus of this presentation is just going to be on the ones found here. So our first family we're going to look at of butterflies is Papilionioidea. It's really hard to say, and I've been looking at these words so much. So please forgive me when I mispronounce these. Swallowtails is much easier to say. So they are the largest butterflies on Earth. There is an Indonesian birdwing that has a wingspan of a foot. Those are not found here, though, as their name might imply. Here you can see in my picture, I've got a zebra swallowtail. No, I'm sorry, not zebra, tiger swallowtail. We have the pipevine, zebra, black swallowtails, giant swallowtails, tiger swallowtails, and spicebush. All of these are the swallowtail species that we see here. These are some of the ones that are honestly the most visible just because of how large they are. Their caterpillars will frequently mimic bird poop when they're young, and then as they get a little bit bigger, they're going to start to look like snakes. I have several pictures of these I will show you later. They tend to overwinter as pupa or inside a chrysalis, and their chrysalises generally resemble dead leaves found near their host plants. So when you hear everybody talking in the fall about leave the leaves, this is why. Because you would not even notice a lot of these chrysalises laying in a pile of dead leaves because they blend right in, which is one of their survival mechanisms. But when all the leaves get raked up and shredded or tossed, sent away to industrial composters, we lose them. So if you want to have more swallowtails and butterflies like this, we need to leave those leaves in our gardens, in our yards, where you can. I will note on here, this swallowtail is nectaring on some butterfly bush. We don't really recommend butterfly bush. It does have some invasive tendencies to it. It also doesn't have the highest quality of nectar that a lot of our native plants will have. So even though they may use it, it's not really the best choice here in Illinois. Pure day are the sulphurs and the whites. These are some of the most common butterflies that you're going to see around your yard. They can be kind of a pest in some agricultural settings, like the cabbage whites and the alfalfa butterfly. They're super common. I see them all over my yard all the time. There are 16 different species of them. Some species are much less common, though. There's only a couple records in the state of them. And then other members of this family, like the Olympia marble, only fly for less than a month in the spring. So not all of these guys are around all summer long. The Olympia marble only flies for a couple of weeks, and then their generation is done. Like Canidae or the gossamer winged butterflies, this is the largest family worldwide of butterflies. There are 6,000 species worldwide, and this family contains about 40% of all butterfly species. They will often rest with their wings closed, but bask with them open. So like we talked about earlier, if they're basking in the sun trying to warm up, they may be sitting there with their wings open, which can help to ID, but sometimes there's a lot of these that look very similar, and so a lot of these can be difficult to ID. The photo here, this is an Acadian hair streak. Their caterpillars are often slug-like, so they just kind of look like little slugs on a plant, but they produce honeydew. It's a waste product. A lot of insects do this. It's kind of like a sticky, sugary waste product. But ants are known to be connoisseurs of honeydew. And so those ants will often tend to the caterpillars almost like cattle. So like, farmers with their cattle, you'll have these ants taking care of these caterpillars so that they can get this food that they like. In return, the caterpillar is going to get protection from predators. It's a nice relationship that they have there. They will overwinter as either eggs or as chrysalis, depending on the species. The Nymphalidae, the brush-footed butterflies, this is another big group of butterflies. They are named for their small furry forelegs. So like any insect, they do technically have 6 legs, but the front legs are diminished. They're much smaller, and they have more sensory functions. So if you've ever heard that, butterflies taste with their feet, that's what that is. Those front 2 legs they're going to use to sort of feel around in there and sense their environment. It's kind of a catch-all family. There's just a lot of different kinds: fritillaries, monarchs, checkerspots, a whole bunch of others. In the photos here, we've got an American lady, a question mark, and a mourning cloak there in the top row. Mourning cloaks are some of the first butterflies that I see. I think they may overwinter even as adults sometimes. So that allows them to get out first thing in the spring. So if you see a dark colored butterfly with sort of a yellowish border, that's a mourning cloak. On the bottom row, we've got a monarch and a red spotted purple. We'll talk about both of those a little bit more later. And then a fritillary there in the butterfly weed in the big photo on the far right. So now let's take a look at the butterflies that have the widest variety of host plants. These are going to be the ones who are not terribly particular, and there's a good chance you've got something in your yard that will be attractive to them. So the first up is the American lady, not to be confused with the painted lady. Those are in the same genus, slightly different species. They look very, very similar though, especially with their open wings. There's some minor differences, but you're basically going to need to look at photographs if, trying to see them in the field. One of the most obvious differences between them, if you notice the photo on the bottom, on the hind wing there, you see those two eye spots, the circles with the dark border around them. Those are meant to fool predators. And on the American lady, she has 2 eye spots. On the painted lady, she's got 4 of those eye spots. So probably the easiest way to tell them apart. They also have some differences in behaviors, as well as differences in host plants. Even though they're the same genus, they like different foods. So the American lady likes pussy toes and pearly everlasting, both nice, shorter, ground-covered native plants. So that's their preferred food, but if they can't find that, they will use many members of the daisy family. And if you've studied any kind of botany at all, you know the daisy family is just huge. There are a ton of different flowers and plants in there. So it's just a huge family. So a lot of stuff for their caterpillars to eat. The adults will feed also on a big variety of flowers. You can see the one on cone flowers there at the bottom. So, just lots of different things. They like open space and low vegetation. Again, those pussy toes and pearly everlastings are lower growing plants. So they're more likely to find them in areas that have shorter vegetation. And they're here pretty much all summer long into fall. So April through October, there's a chance you're going to see them. Now, when we talk about them flying, the dates that are on here are statewide. So those earliest dates are going to be more likely to be seen in southern Illinois, whereas the later dates, you might, in my area, we're probably not going to see them in April. It might be, mid-May before we start seeing them up here. But then October, we'll be seeing them, throughout that time too. So they're going to overwinter either as adults or chrysalids. Again, when they overwinter as adults, that sort of gives them a little head start in the spring. They're just ready to go, ready to start laying eggs just as soon as things start warming up. Silvery Checkerspots. This is another really pretty one. Their host plants are going to be many members, again, of the aster and daisy family, like black-eyed Susans, coneflowers, sunflowers, wood asters. Huge, huge family of plants for them to be feeding on. And the adults will feed on clover, milkweed, dogbane. Again, lots of things in those families as well. They also like open space, but they like a little bit wetter areas because the males will sometimes form what's called, and I think this is the most adorable thing ever, they will form a puddle club. And a puddle club is a gathering of males, usually the same species, but sometimes mixed in with other species, all drinking from a shallow water source. So like a little puddle. And they'll just, crowd around this puddle and they get obviously water from there, but there will also be dissolved nutrients. So salts, minerals, things like that they need. And, they're just kind of mixed in with the muddy water that's in there. And so all these males, they find a puddle, they'll go hang out in there. And then if a female should come by, they'll all swoop up and all try and impress her at the same time. So if you're a hiker and you come across them and you startle them, they may all swoop up as well. It's just kind of a cool display. Many swallowtails will also display this behavior, and it can really be pretty impressive if you happen to stumble across it. They also fly for most of the year, April through mid-September, and will overwinter as a caterpillar. Red-spotted purple, this is a very striking butterfly, very large. They've got a wingspan of 2.5 to 4 inches, so really very large if you see them. That bottom photo there was on my Joe Pye weed. That's a really good plant to have if you want to attract butterflies. It seems to be quite the magnet in my yard. Their caterpillar host plants include many trees like basswood, aspen, birch, and black cherry. The adults will feed on lots of different things. Again, in addition to flowers, sap, rotting fruit, dung, and carrion. They do tend to like more wooded areas or places with trees. Again, they want places where they're going to be able to lay their eggs. And since trees are their host plants, they got to be in an area that has some trees. There are technically two subspecies here, red-spotted purples and white admirals. They're subspecies of the same species. White admirals look similar, but they have a white band along the wings, and they're only seen in really the far northern part of the state. There are hybrids. They will intermix where the ranges overlap. So if you see something that looks like a red-spotted purple but has a lot of white on it, it's possibly that. And it also is somewhat of a mimic of the toxic pipevine butterfly, which is a really pretty one we'll see in a little bit here too. But they overwinter as a caterpillar rolled up in a dead leaf. So once again, leaving the leaves so that we have more of these guys. The eastern tiger swallowtail, this is a super common one that we have up here. But again, notice the host plants are trees. When I first started doing this research, I really wasn't expecting this, but so many of our native butterflies use trees as their host plants. So if you are planning a butterfly garden, you really have to think beyond flowers and think about the trees and shrubs that you could add in your yard as well. If you follow the work of Dr. Doug Tallamy, he talks about all the different species that he finds on the oaks in his yard. And again, so many of these will use trees as their host plants, but trees are also some of the first things that bloom in the springtime. So when the adults are here looking for places to get nectar from, a lot of times those trees will be the first things they really have to feed on. People talk about using dandelions or dandelions being the first food. They're really not. These trees and shrubs are really more what our native pollinators need. So these adults will feed on dogbane, aster, things in the Fabaceae, the bean and pea families. And they will overwinter as chrysalis. Again, their chrysalis looks a lot like a dead leaf. They will hang it off a variety of things, but that's how they survive our winters. The females of the eastern tiger swallowtail can be either yellow or the dark morph. So I thought this was kind of interesting. Look how different these two butterflies look, but it's just kind of a genetic thing that sometimes you get one, sometimes you get the other one. Their caterpillar also, again, like many others, looks like bird poop when it's young. And then the older that caterpillar gets, it turns into a green snake mimic. So it gets those eye spots on the head, and then it has like a little gizmo at the top of its head. And I always forget how to pronounce this. Osmetrium, I think is what it's called, that it sort of sticks out and it almost looks like a forked snake tongue. It's bright orange and it emits a very foul smelling liquid. But it looks like a snake tongue, little orange snake tongue coming out of the top of its head. It's really wild. Black swallowtails, they're one of the few that's not hosted by trees. Their host plants are members of the carrot family. So in addition to carrots, parsley, and dill, fennel, other stuff you might have in your garden, the native hosts include golden alexanders, great angelica, spotted water hemlock, and wild chervil, among others. So again, all members of that carrot family. Like monarchs, the caterpillars will absorb toxins from the host plants, which will go on then to make the adult butterflies unpalatable to most of their potential predators. So The adults will feed on pretty much anything that's nectar rich and gives them a little spot to stand. So things like butterfly weed, purple coneflower, these guys are everywhere. I've seen these in my yard. I live in the suburbs and I've seen these guys all over my yard as well. I always leave some dill going. I planted dill once, and because I didn't remove the seeds, I will now have dill till the end of time. I always leave a few of the plants go, and it's mostly because I will almost invariably end up with caterpillars on it. And their caterpillar or their chrysalis is also really cool. If you can see on that photo there in the bottom right, you can see that little string of silk that they use to attach themselves to a surface. Any kind of vertical surface, they will climb up and they make that little bit of silk and just kind of hang on. And that's how they spend the winter. They have a couple different generations here. So there are some caterpillars or some chrysalis, that will hatch during the summer, but in the fall, they will make these, and that's just how they get through the winter here. And of course, the beloved monarch. This is our state insect here in Illinois. Their host plant is anything in the milkweed family, any of those Asclepias plants. There are, depending on who you talk to, 7, 9, 13 species that are native here in Illinois. Common milkweed is obviously the most common, but it's not always as well behaved in our yard. So unless you have a lot of space for it to really stretch out and grow, you might want to try a different variety of milkweed if you're looking to put this in your yard. Sullivan's milkweed is a great one. Butterfly weed is always a great one too. It's a little bit smaller. It doesn't grow quite as tall as some of the other ones. And it's got those really showy orange flowers that are great. But monarchs will lay their eggs. I think they seem to have a preference for common milkweed, but they'll go on swamp milkweed or butterfly weed. I found caterpillars on all of those. The adults will feed on a variety of flowers again too, on the milkweed flowers, but also on things in the aster family, beans, whatever they can get to. Again, another larger butterfly with a 3.5 to 4.5 inch wingspan. They returned to Illinois in March or April. I have just seen there have been reports of monarchs already in central Illinois. I don't usually see them up here where I'm at until more like May. So, they kind of take their time getting all the way north up here, or at least that's when, we start to see any kind of numbers of them. And then this is one that migrates. They do not stay here in any form. They are going to migrate to Mexico, which is an absolutely fascinating strategy that they've developed for getting through the winter. Absolutely amazing. And I could do an entire webinar just on monarchs, the way they manage to. So what they do is they have generally about 4 generations up here over the course of the summer. And then the last generation, when it's time to leave, they hatch out and they just start heading south. And how they know to do this, who knows? It's just this weird instinctual thing that they have, that they know that they need to start heading south. And their body enters what's called diapause. And diapause is basically where, if you imagine turning, say, 18 years old, and then all of a sudden you just stop aging. That's what happens to them. They become an adult, and then their development just sort of hits pause. And rather than the adults only living for about 2 weeks like they normally would, they will live for, maybe 4 or 5 months. So they'll fly all the way down to Mexico. They will live in the oyamel trees in the forests of central Mexico. And then about February-ish, they will start heading back. And once they hit about Texas, development just kicks in again. They'll lay their eggs. they will die. The new generations will come up and continue that trek back north. Again, they're not taught to do this. Their parents didn't do it. So how they know how to do it is just, it's fascinating. But that is their strategy for surviving the winters. So let's talk about what you can plant to get the most bang for your buck. So what plants do we have here that are going to attract the most butterflies? Again, specifically with regard to hosting. So little blue stem. I know we've been talking about butterflies more than skippers, but I had to throw this in here because little blue stem grass is a larval host for 9 different skipper species, as well as being the overwintering habitat for many pollinator species. There are some bumblebees, the queens will overwinter underneath clumps of little blue stem. It's really great native grass. It's a bunching grass, stands upright, doesn't flop over. Some of the other fountaining type grasses. It likes full sun, medium to dry, well-drained soils, has really great winter interest, again, because it stands upright, makes these very nice decorative clumps. It's also said to be deer resistant, at least as deer resistant as anything can be. And it is good for birds because birds will like to perch in it, eat the seeds. They'll use the grasses for their nests and so on. So really great addition to your pollinator garden. Showy tick trefoil. Like other tick trefoils, you might want to think carefully about where you plant this. The seeds are those kind of sticker seeds. They'll attach to passing animals and clothing, but it's a legume and those add nitrogen back into the soil. So if you have some poor soils, this can help put nitrogen back in them, kind of help condition them a little bit. The nectar, pollen, foliage, and seeds are also attractive to pollinators, mammals, and birds. And that's in addition to being the host plant for 8 different butterfly and skipper species. So eastern tail blue, gray hairstreak, northern cloudy wing. They've got some really great names for these butterflies too. So again, it's kind of a sprawling plant. So you'll want to make sure it's in a dense area also so it doesn't try and take over. Fold apart sun, music soils. But, that is a good one for the butterflies. And as we mentioned, oaks, larval host, 5 different species of hair streaks, juveniles, dusky wing, red spotted purples, white admirals, nice big tree. Nice thing about oaks is no matter what kind of conditions you have, there is probably an oak that will grow there. They are a slower growing tree, but not quite as slow as people kind of make them out to be. But if you've got an area that gets a little wet, you can plant a swamp white oak. If you got an area that's drier, you could plant a red oak. Just, again, lots and lots of different varieties, but all surprisingly beneficial for our butterflies. Black cherry is another one we see a lot in the woodlands around here. This is a larval host for 2 hair streaks, eastern tiger swallowtails, red spotted purples, spring azures, viceroys, and white admirals. Didn't mention viceroys earlier when we were talking about monarchs, but they are one of the most well-known mimics for monarchs that are out there. Although it has been recently shown that they are toxic in their own right. So it's possible that I always mix up Batesian mimicry and Mullerian mimicry. One is something that's not toxic that imitates something that is toxic. And another one is 2 things that are toxic that just imitate each other. I don't remember the difference between them, but there it is. So anyway, good examples of mimics there. I don't see as many viceroys as I do monarchs, but maybe if I planted more black cherries. These are fast-growing trees as opposed to our oaks, and they can get anywhere from 25 feet tall to 110, depending on how their conditions and how long they have to grow. Very pretty flowers on them, like any kind of cherry tree or anything in that family, and they bloom in spring, March to June, and they get these really cool fruits on them, the cherries that birds love. And it's also a really good nectar and pollen source for lots of our pollinators. New England aster, this is another one to kind of be careful with just because it can get a little aggressive. So definitely maybe wait to plant it in a more mature garden or make sure you're removing the seed heads so that they don't take over. But as a fall bloomer, this makes a really great nectar source for butterflies, either like the monarch that needs fuel to get it all the way down to Mexico, or like the ones that overwinter here as adults, gives them a good food source as they're trying to bulk up, just like a mammal might do, to make it through the winter. So fall blooming flowers are really important additions to your pollinator garden, just to make sure that you are providing food for them all year long. They come in all different shades of purple, but are the larval host for northern crescents, painted ladies, pearl crescents, silvery checkerspots, and dozens of moths. Blue violets, these get a bad rap. There are a native wildflower. They're actually our state wildflower, which is kind of cool. And I just think they're really pretty. I have these all over my lawn. They just kind of showed up and they have that gorgeous little flower on them. And, they're very dainty, and they are the larval host for 6 different species of fritillary butterflies. They're low growing. I think they're very polite as far as flowers go, and I like them. So highly advise, if you have these in your yard, to keep them. They make a lot of interest on there. Additionally, the deer seem to like them. So if the deer will eat those and stay away from some of my other flowers, that's a trade I will happily make. Now, maybe you want to look at how you can protect some or have space for some state endangered and threatened butterflies. So regal fritillary is one that is threatened, and their host, once again, is violets. So if you want to have these in your yard, help these out, let those violets live. The adults will feed on thistles and milkweed, among other things. Again, thistles are something that I think kind of gets a bad rap, but they are definitely a magnet for a lot of butterflies to feed on. They like prairies and sand dunes. And so if you have areas that are sandier, have sandier soil, you might have better luck seeing these. And they're here around mid-May through September, so they show up a little bit later in the year. And the eggs will hatch in the fall and overwinter as caterpillars. They only have that one generation here per year. So, they show up late, they hang around, lay those eggs late, and they overwinter in that leaf litter. So once again, this is why we're leaving the leaves, is to help protect butterflies like the regal fritillary. Garner blue, this is another one that we have here in the state that is federally endangered. It's not just endangered here in Illinois, it is federally listed. Their main host is lupins. So they, and it's their only host. And lupins need a much sandier soil. So if you are in an area, someplace like, around Kankakee Sands, or, any of the areas in the state that have much sandier soils, you might look into finding, especially the sundial lupins. That's the native kind. There's another kind that's often sold in stores that's not native and does actually tend to be more invasive. So if you're looking for these, look for the sundial lupins. Again, these caterpillars are tended by ants, just like the other ones we discussed, where the ants will protect the caterpillar in exchange for getting that honeydew to eat. And they don't really travel very far. So they stay pretty close to where they hatch. And as long as they continue to have food sources there, and places to lay their eggs, which is how they overwinter, they will stay nearby. Swamp metalmark, I think this is a really cool looking butterfly as well. Their host is swamp thistle and tall thistle. But again, as their name implies, they like areas that are wet. So their host plant is also a plant that likes it in wetter areas. He's a little guy with only about an inch wingspan, and they are threatened by invasive species in their area. Because of the loss and the decline of wetlands has led to species decline. It's threatened or even extirpated. That means extinct in an area, not like globally extinct, but just from a particular area. So they're threatened or extirpated throughout much of their small range. Invasive species like honeysuckle, stiltgrass, and buckthorn further degrade their habitat. And spongy moth, the formerly named gypsy moth, defoliates vegetation in its habitat as well. So, when we talk about invasive species harming native populations, this is the kind of thing we're talking about. So, wetlands in general are threatened, but when we get the degradation of our wetlands by invasive species, that causes even further problems. So this is a really pretty little guy too. I don't know that I have ever seen one, but I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye out for him when I am in a wetland. Now let's talk about some extreme specialists. So how do we attract some of these picky eaters? I had to throw this guy in here just because he's kind of weird looking. That little snout is a modified mouth part. And when they are on a tree, they look just like a dead leaf. That little nose just kind of sticks onto the branch, and it just looks like a leaf hanging onto the tree. But the only thing they will eat is hackberry. So if you have a hackberry tree, there's a good chance you may have some American snouts. And this is another migrator. So they don't go all the way to Mexico, but they will go to the southern United States over the winter, and then come back up here during the summer. Pipevine swallowtail. This is another really fun one. Their host is pipevine, Dutchman's pipe, and Virginia snakeroot, all members of that Aristolochia genus. The adults will feed on thistleflox ironweed. These are not often found north of Peoria here in Illinois, but another example of mimicry. Again, as we mentioned, they resemble the red-spotted purple, and as well as the spicebush swallowtail, and the dark morph of the eastern tiger swallowtail. So usually found near woodlands, just a really cool butterfly. I had a chance to see these when I was at a training. I think we were actually in Peoria, and there was a nature center there that had a big stand of pipevine, and they were just all full of these pipevine swallowtails. The spicebush swallowtail as well. So here you can see, saw these at that same little nature center in Peoria. As you can see there, when we talk about things looking like snake mimics, that's what we mean. So super cool caterpillar. His host is spicebush and sassafras. The young caterpillars resemble bird droppings again. And the way they wrap themselves up in leaves is, you can kind of see on that leaf there, he's laid down some silk. And when they lay it down, the silk is kind of wet. As it dries, it contracts. And so it kind of wraps that leaf around the caterpillar, protecting it, which is just kind of cool. And they will visit parks and gardens near woodlands. And they will stay in that little makeshift shelter that they make during the day, coming out at night to feed. And their pupa changes color depending on the time of year. So it's either green in the summer to match with those green leaves, or brown in the winter to match the dead leaves. Baltimore checkerspots. These are really cool. They will lay their eggs on white turtlehead, which is a plant that's usually found in wetter areas. We usually put them in rain gardens. Just a really pretty little flower. But the larvae overwinter and then will resume feeding in spring. But they, when they wake up, they'll just kind of wander off to find something else to eat. But they only lay their eggs on the white turtle head. So that's kind of neat. And I thought their chrysalis was really pretty as well. Um, so it was hard to find exactly what these eat. The only thing I could really find besides turtlehead is the non-native plantains. So I know like I have non-native plantains just kind of growing in my lawn. So that's, again, the kind of thing that they will eat. I had to throw this guy in here just because he's the weirdest little guy I have come across. It is the only North American butterfly with carnivorous larvae. So the caterpillars, instead of having a proboscis that sips nectar or a chewing mouth part to eat leaves, they have piercing mouth parts because they eat woolly aphids. It is an obligate carnivore. That's all it eats. And so the female will lay her eggs in the middle of a patch of woolly aphids. The adult will eat the honeydew from the aphids along with dung or carrion. And then as the caterpillar snacks, it will cover itself in the woolly skins of those aphids to help camouflage itself. And if that is not the most metal thing I have ever heard about a butterfly, I don't know what is. All right, so if you're going to grow a butterfly garden, what kinds of things do you need to think about? First off is right plant, right place. Make sure where you are going to plant, you know what the conditions are for the sun, the moisture, the soil type, and then look for plants that fit those conditions. Never try to adapt conditions to fit the plant. You will likely not win. And don't forget the grasses, trees, and shrubs. About 50 to 70% of your plant should be grasses. Remember that many of those are used as host plants. Plus, they take up space and help prevent weeds too. So, and of course, as I've said, probably 7 or 8 times by now, make sure you leave the leaves there. Those are how the caterpillars or the eggs or the pupas are going to make it through the winter. A lot of times they're going to be hiding out in those leaves. Make sure you've got a mix of host and nectar plants, as well as a water or puddling source. We talked about the puddle clubs earlier. If you can have, kind of a shallow dish. I've seen people use like a bird bath, just, set the bowl of the bird bath on the ground. Just make sure you're changing out the water regularly so you don't get mosquitoes in there. And don't bother with these so-called butterfly houses that you'll see in garden centers. Butterflies will not use them. There is nothing in there that a butterfly needs. And don't forget the nectar plants then as well. Remembering that some adults will eat other things too, like tree sap or whatever. So, you may not get them in there, but some great nectaring plants are listed here. Joe Pyeweed, Blazing Star. Those are 2 I've had a ton of luck with in my yard. They are full of butterflies every year. Wild phlox, wild bergamot, any of those. These all just are absolute butterfly magnets. So if you're looking to bring those butterflies into your yard, these are good places to start. And I wanted to thank Dr. Daniel Doman, who is one of our master naturalists, who put together the huge list of butterflies and their host plants for us to use that I consulted with for this, as well as a great book called Butterflies of Illinois, a Field Guide by Jeffords, Post, and Weicker. Really great informative book with beautiful pictures and lots of really, really good information in there. So if you are interested in learning more about butterflies, I highly recommend that field guide. I'm a field guide addict. And that one was really great for this research. And finally, if you would like to see past recordings of 4 Seasons Gardening webinars, you can go to our YouTube channel. We will be posting this webinar if you feel like watching it again. It'll probably take a couple of weeks, but we will get it up there and tell your friends. And if you wouldn't mind taking our survey to let my bosses know what you thought of this presentation. It's always good for us to get some feedback, lets us know what you are interested in learning more about and what you think of our presentations. So really appreciate that. And I think we got just a couple of minutes left here. If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to take them.